Hi, welcome to our final session of the fall workshop series where we are deep diving the coaching system assessment. I am Linda, the owner of Linda Ryan Consulting and the developer of this assessment. Today, we are focused on the culture section of this coaching system assessment. So let's dive in. If this is your first time here, you can watch all of the previous recordings on this YouTube playlist. You can follow the bit.ly there, or you can pause the recording and grab your phone to scan the QR code. It is unlisted. Feel free to share it with folks, but I don't necessarily have it out there yet, just because it's something that's in the works and I've just been making available for folks who have registered. So just heads up, in case you go to search for it, it might be hard to find, but feel free to reach out. Here's our plan for today. I am going to review the tool really quick, just do a quick introduction and go over the directions. Then we'll walk through each of the indicators that are in the culture section and provide time for reflection. Those of you watching the recording, I invite you to press pause on the video after each of the indicators so that you can make notes for yourself about each indicator, thinking from the lens of your own system and your own context. And I also invite questions. So if you're watching the video, feel free to leave comments on the video and I'll make sure to get back to them, or feel free to email me directly as well. Lastly, I'll share some recommendations for how I might use this tool in my own system, and we will close with a thank you. All right, so this coaching system assessment, right, really covers 4 broad categories. Today, we're talking about culture, which we're breaking it down and it's in its own silo, right? But we have to remember that silos in education don't work. We have to be thinking about things cross departmentally, right? We need to cross all of the functions within our system to really consider how does each piece impact each other. And then we also need to think about if we're putting it in a puzzle, right, metaphor, then are all of the pieces the right shape, or are they the right size, right? So when we think about the people, the processes, the products, the culture, we have to remember that this is human work and every system is going to function differently and for different reasons, right? So your context matters. And while we can lean on the research and we can lean on what the research says, we want to be considering, well, what does that mean given our context and given our story, right? So asking ourselves, how are our silos working together and how are the shapes in our system looking, right? And does the shape that we're reading in the research, does it make sense for our own system? When you engage with the assessment, you will see that there are directions in the very beginning. And so each section has an indicator and then a Likert scale or rubric, right, that you can measure over to the side. So, but you have to pay attention because the descriptions for each of the numbers will change with each indicator. They just help provide a little bit more context about each of those indicators. So as you are going through and scoring, just make sure you're paying attention to those and not just using the previous indicators scale description to apply to the next one, because they will shift. All right, let's take a look at the first indicator. Sorry, this slide is a little bit text heavy, but I had a lot to say about it because I left this indicator very generic. It is a very generic, possibly subjective indicator, right? So there is a positive culture of coaching, and we go from negative to highly positive, right? And depending on who you ask, this might vary as well. Something that I did when thinking about this for the deep dive is I took a look at how each of these words are defined, right? So according to Merriam-Webster, culture is the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterizes an institution or organization. Okay, so that's culture. The word positive is defined as having a good effect or favorable. So if we put these definitions together and we think about a positive culture of coaching, we might have this definition that I have listed here: the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that favorably characterizes instructional coaching in an institution or organization. So when we are assessing this indicator, that's all that we want to be thinking about. What are our shared attitudes around coaching? What are our values around coaching? What are our goals around coaching? What are the practices, right? And are they favorable in terms of a culture of coaching, or are we seeing that there's some negative words attached to each of those things? Additionally, you're going to find that when we think about or Google a coaching culture, right? It's not just education that's thinking about this. You'll find that many different industries are thinking about coaching and the impact of a coaching culture on whether on the like development of them as of their employees as professionals, right? So the Center for Creative Leadership defines a coaching culture as one where people can freely give and receive feedback. They support each other in developing their thinking, right? So you might find yourself in a meeting and someone is willing to speak up, right? And play, I wonder what the impact of that would be, or ask a question about that, or challenge each other and say like, oh, let's like map that out and think about that, right? Or they develop conversations, right? So they're engaged in that. They're working on developing an employee. And so we want to think about how does all of that impact the culture or the climate that we have around coaching. Additionally, I think it's helpful to ask ourselves here, what do folks say about coaching? If we asked them, when I say coaching or instructional coaching, what do you think of, right? What do people say? What kinds of adjectives do they use? Do they say coaching's really effective, right? And it's dripping with sarcasm, or they use a tone of complete disdain about coaching? That tells us a lot about the culture that we have created or that we've inherited, right? About coaching. And so all of that is wrapped up in this one indicator. So while it is subjective, right, and it is very general, it covers a lot of information. So I encourage you, if you are thinking about how you're assessing this indicator, that you take time to really think about all of the factors at play, even though it's just listed as one indicator. All right, let's keep going. This next indicator, right? Coaches are expected to maintain teacher confidentiality and share only general information with leadership. There is a reason that I use this word confidentiality, okay? And it's because it's all over what we think about when we're building relationships, right? Because at the center of a strong coach and teacher or coach and coachee relationship is one that's centered on trust, right? And so we know that confidentiality is an important part of building trust, which is why it's listed here. And so on the indicator, right, you'll see that on the one, there's coaches are asked to share confidential information. Maybe they're asked to kind of gossip a little bit about what their coaching conversations are covering. Whereas on the other side, coaches are, their confidence is maintained, right? And they're not asked to breach that. Note, this is one really for leaders to consider in terms of how they're engaging coaches in understanding what's happening in their coaching conversations. Okay. Now, there's some caveats here, right? So the goal with coaching, and we know we have to establish a trusting relationship, and that trust needs to be reciprocal, right? So both of the people in that relationship need to know what they're working on, know what goals they're working on, and how that's going to go, right? So for me, the main key piece here is that we lean on transparency. The coach is transparent with the teacher about what their job is, why they're there, what they're working on, and how they're going to do it. And likewise, the teacher is transparent about what they're struggling with, what they're excited about, what they're maybe misunderstanding, and how they want to improve, giving feedback to that coach, right? We want to do this work together. Likewise, a coach might find themselves in a position because it's the leader's job to supervise instruction, right? In our education world. When we lean on transparency, this will help us avoid gossip as a coach, right? So we can say to our teachers or the people that we're coaching, hey, part of my job, I do have to share some of, the work that I'm doing as a coach, right? I plan on saying this, or here's the document that I plan on sharing with our principal, for example. Are you comfortable with me sharing this? Right? That is a level of transparency and honesty that everyone can get behind. And it also honors the person who's being coached in having a voice about what's shared, while also not breaching that confidentiality. So we can't ignore the fact that in education, a leader's job is to supervise instruction, but we can lean on transparency and conversations that are grounded in honesty to help us do that. All right. This next indicator says all stakeholders believe in the effectiveness of coaching support. And we go from never to always, right? So we have to consider who are all of the stakeholders in our system, right? And who's being coached. If we come from this perspective, Atul Gawande says everyone needs a coach. I switch that to everyone deserves a coach. And that I could be not quoting somebody else who said that. So I'm not owning that, but I truly believe that, right? And I think that's the essence of what he's saying here is that as professionals in any profession, when we want to be better, when we want to get better, forgive my typo there, I apologize, just saw it. We get better when we have someone else help alongside, helping us pay attention to what it is that we might be missing ourselves. We can't always see everything when we're in the work. So it's helpful when we can have someone else who is going to enhance where we already are, which is why everyone deserves a coach is a belief system, right? And the evidence of that is who's being coached. Is it only teachers that need to be fixed, right? Are our leaders participating in a culture of coaching? Do they have a coach? Are they working with peers on being coached and, finding themselves in feedback loops? Are coaches being coached? How are we talking about that and saying, yeah, I'm working with my coach because I believe in coaching, right? That's true for me in terms of my work. I have a coach. I have other peers that I lean on too when I'm seeking feedback as well. The other key piece of this is that feedback is a two-way street. Okay. Teachers can be coaching coaches on the work that they're doing. Okay. Because if we are never asking, if we are only giving feedback to the people that we're coaching, then we are not engaging in a culture of coaching. We are not seeking feedback on our own work. And the best people to ask are the people that are involved in the coaching relationship with us. So I encourage you to consider, if you take nothing else away from today, think about who is invited to give feedback, when and how. And is it a one-way street currently? And how can you make it a two-way street so that everybody has an opportunity to participate in a feedback loop and receive feedback on the work that they're doing? Okay. This next indicator, right, talks about coaching cycles. And coaching cycles came up too in the coaching process. But I bring it back here because I think it's so essential to how we are creating a culture of coaching. So we have to think about the structure of our coaching cycles and how they are an integral part of our coaching culture. Sometimes coaches who have an admin background or have been working or are currently working on their administrative license, for example, find themselves in an observation and feedback loop. And that is only part of a coaching cycle, right? Which is why we go from number 1 feedback only to 5 full cycles. When we think about a full cycle, we have to include time for pre-planning and time for shared goal setting with the teachers that we support. So we have to go beyond simply visiting classrooms and providing feedback. That's not coaching, that's supervising, right? The coaching time comes when we are working alongside a teacher, we are planning and we are practicing the work. Okay. So we are working alongside the teacher in all of those phases, but we're making sure that we're making time for all 4. We can't ignore the time for exploration, learning, and practice that is involved with improved instruction. So if you find that right now, you keep giving teachers feedback and then you go back and you visit again and you're not seeing improved practice, ask yourself, am I missing that critical component of a coaching cycle? And how much practice and planning am I giving teachers with my support present? Okay. And so the other thing is that to ask ourselves is, are teachers involved in this observation and feedback loop, right? We can see how teachers are present and a part of that pre-planning, goal setting, obviously working on that practice piece, whether it's part of a coaching discussion or when the teacher is practicing in their classroom. But how are we engaging teachers in that observation and debrief part of a coaching cycle? Are we asking them and being clear with them on like, hey, what kinds of, we just worked on this goal, we just did this practice. What exactly is going to be our evidence when we get into the classroom that I can be kind of pulling and doing those look fors for you? And then how are we engaging them in that debrief, looking at that evidence, helping them feel empowered about examining what it is that their practice looks like so that then we can together think about how do we want to improve? In addition, as an essential part of this coaching cycle, we want to make sure that we are developing room for safe practice, right? So there are so many times that teachers participate in professional development on a Wednesday, and the very next day, people are visiting their classrooms looking to see that they're doing it, right? And that is true for coaching cycles as well. So if we find that we are quickly turning around and trying to see evidence of teachers putting things in place, we haven't necessarily given them time to develop those skills or practice in a failure-free environment, which is key to learning. We think about that with students all the time. How are we giving students multiple opportunities to practice? How are we giving them multiple opportunities to show mastery? But because teachers are adults, we do not provide that room for that. So I encourage you to consider, where is the room for safe practice? Maybe you are supporting practice during a coaching session where the teacher is then working on their language or working on a routine that you are getting ready to implement, or you're giving them the opportunity to practice it without you being present to pull look fors and to supervise. Maybe you're just there as a cheerleader to help kind of give the teacher some visual reminders or some, some hand motions that guides them through the routine. But it is so that you are alongside helping them get better, not observing to see what they're doing. And that is going to be key in developing safe practice for them. All right. Another part of this is what are we asking our coaches to do, right? So this next indicator, coaches remain focused on coaching and instruction without additional duties assigned, such as covering classrooms. Don't get mad at me. Stay with me on this one. I promise it's going to make, I'm not going to be yelling at you about the way that your current coaches are functioning. But it is something for us to consider, right? So on one side, we have coaching as the lowest priority versus the other side where coaching is the highest priority. And we might find ourselves somewhere in between, right? So depending on the work that our coaches do, this came up in our people section too. Are we clearly defining the role of our coaches? And is the work that they're doing a match to that? If we've hired coaches to be working on instruction and to be working with teachers on instructional improvements or enhancements, then that is the priority of their work. But if they are assigned additional duties to the point that it makes coaching the lowest priority for them, then we have to ask ourselves who we've hired and for what purpose, right? So that really sends a message to the people that are involved about where our priorities stand. Now, this is going to be subjective to your context, right? You might have funding sources that dictate how a coach's role is defined and the kind of work that they're doing. You might also have to support an instructional coach who's working on their admin degree and currently has some internship assignments that they need to do. I've been there. So there are certainly going to be reasons that we find other duties are going to be assigned or other tasks are going to happen. But we have to ask how much time is being given to coaching, especially if we've given them that title and that role as a coach. The other thing here is we cannot ignore that we are currently experiencing teacher shortages, and it can be difficult to find substitutes when our teachers need to be out. And so sometimes you may need a coach to step in and to cover a classroom. Or you might be working under the design of opportunity culture where coaches are both teaching part-time and coaching part-time. All of that is fine. It is all about your context and the role of the coach that you've designed. However, again, it communicates what the priority is of the role and whether the priority of the work right now is instruction. Because if we constantly take our eyes off of instruction and we are working on lunch duty or recess duty or otherwise, then we are messaging that currently instruction is not our focus. So it's just, I'll leave that there. The other thing that we want to consider is how much time coaches actually have to be doing coaching. You have meetings that are going to be scheduled. There are certain times where teachers will have coverage for coaching sessions versus not. Master schedules can impact how much availability a coach has to be working with a teacher on particular content areas or with the number of teachers in a particular grade level. Especially coaches who are driving between different buildings, for example. So one thing that you can do is do a schedule audit and ask yourself, okay, how much time am I working on coaching, right? Pull up a schedule from the past month or a calendar, your schedule, because you might not be following your schedule, right? But whatever you have that shows you data about how you've spent your time, pull that out and ask yourself, do that schedule audit and say, like, how much time am I spending on coaching, right? And all of the things that are wrapped up in coaching. The last point that I have here is for us to consider that in a coach's schedule, there is a need for preparation time because prepared coaches are more effective. So a coach, especially if they are newer, needs time to practice their coaching conversations. It goes beyond this like live time with a teacher. You have to, and this is true for veteran coaches too. We all benefit from spending time thinking about what is our coaching conversation going to look like? Are there any anticipated responses that we can go in prepared for? Are there resources we need to pull? Doing all of that not only increases a coach's confidence in facilitating that conversation, but it also communicates a respect for the teacher's time. Because when we can be concise, when we can be clear, and when we can be efficient with the time that we have, we are communicating how important it is for us to come prepared. And that communicates the priority that we have on instruction and honoring that teacher's time as well, which again contributes to a positive coaching culture. Okay, last indicator here. It's a short one. The indicator states the funding source for coaches is sustainable. Okay, and we go from 1, not sustainable, to 5, highly sustainable. The reason I have this in the coaching culture is that we know, right, that coaching is a powerful professional development tool. There's enough research out there that supports that. And we know that the best professional development happens within individual contexts and in an ongoing manner. So when we think about our funding sources, we know that coaching and supporting an entire position, right, is one of the most expensive ways that we can invest in professional development because we are funding somebody's salary, their benefits, possibly their retirement, et cetera, right? So we have to consider how sustainable is it for us to fund this position, this human, right? And if it's a short-term funding solution, is it communicating the message that that coach is being hired to fix something that we identify is a current problem, but we don't anticipate being a future problem, right? This goes against the idea that everyone deserves a coach. Because if we truly believe that, then we would believe in the power of having a coach all the time and possibly for everybody, right? So we can potentially sabotage our coaching and teacher relationships if we are sending the message that this is only a short-term experiment, as well as working on where is the other funding coming for the other pieces of our coaching system, like ongoing professional development for the coaches themselves. So just all of that to consider, how does that impact, right, the culture and the messaging that we are sending around coaching? Okay, so hopefully you've paused after each of these indicators to help you reflect on them, because at the end of the assessment is an area for you to reflect on and identify some actions that you can take. So you want to think about areas of strength. Where do you have some 4s and 5s that you can feel really good about, that are already in place and already established in your system? And then think about your 1s and 2s, and you can decide where to put your 3s, right? But 1s and 2s are going to help you identify some areas of opportunity. And then from there, right, you can identify what are some things you can do now or in the near term, right, that you can turn around quickly and begin working on. Whereas, what are some other things that are going to require some longer term investment and considerations or longer term work in order to start working on those indicators? And those would go in your long term action sections. So these are my recommendations for how you might use this tool to assess your coaching system, right? So you want to be as objective as possible, and try to pull out evidence that you have to support each of these things rather than just simply check. You might have gone through this and checked off a certain number, but I encourage you to search for evidence that supports the numbers that you selected. You might try to find some materials or tangible items if you have a coaching handbook, for example, or something else like a coaching schedule, for example, for the culture section. And then especially for this culture section, it's so important that we engage folks in focus groups with teachers, coaches, leaders, right? All the folks that are a part of this coaching system. We need to hear from them about what are they seeing in terms of these indicators, and how are their experiences the same or different? And how does that inform the results of our assessment review? And then I would encourage taking all of that information and kind of summarizing it, using that take action section and determining how can we turn this into a report that guides maybe a strategic plan about what we're going to do related to this coaching system assessment. Well, friends, that's it from me. Thank you so much for joining me for this fall workshop series. I will be sending the recording to all of you, and I encourage you to take a look if this is the first workshop that you're participating in. I encourage you to take a look at the rest. Tell your friends about the assessment. I certainly hope it's helpful. And I invite you to, if you're watching this recording before December 16th, my next workshop, we're going to do a text talk. It's a really informal discussion, but I do use a protocol because I'm that kind of meeting facilitator. But we're going to talk about this guide from the Meadows Center that focuses on 10 key policies and practices for instructional coaching. Thanks for being here, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful day.